You face battles most never fought, pain, struggle, adversity. But here, we use that as fuel. This is the Battle Harder podcast, where we motivate, educate, and inspire warriors of life, veterans, survivors, leaders. We share stories and strategies to turn pain into progress. Here's your host, Coach Rob. Let's lock in and battle harder.
What's up, guys? My name is Coach Rob. I'm the host here of the Battle Harder podcast, where I hope to motivate, educate, and inspire you to become the best version of yourself. Today's guest is a very interesting person. I can't wait to talk about his stuff. Soul-stirring episode. I'm going to sit down with a man who's a therapist, a pilot, and an author. He literally rebuilt his life from the operating table up. And after surviving a liver transplant, which we'll get into, and losing everything, he found a new mission through one of the darkest paths imaginable. And I'm not going to say what that is because we're going to let him discuss that and describe that. So I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Chad Scott.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and chat with you and your listeners.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's definitely a different path and an interesting one. So before we get into all of that good stuff, just give me a little background of who you are and what you do.
So my name is Chad Scott. I'm a therapist. I'm from northern Minnesota, northeast Minnesota. Just had a bunch of wildfires up here.
Wow.
So yeah, that was definitely something that my own could have a whole episode on that trauma. But been a private pilot since 1998, I think. And and actually have a private practice here in Minnesota and been a professor of psychology. And that's I guess my intro in a nutshell.
So with your practice, is there something particular that you specialize in when dealing with patients?
Yeah. So I did a lot of work with the criminal justice populations, but I also have always been in community mental health. So I've always had more of I've been a generalist in mental health, but also I guess subspecialized in criminal psychology. Yeah.
Is there anything in the realm of mental health that like you prefer or something that like you nerd out on that's kind of like something you enjoy?
I would say, especially the first half of my career, I really nerded out on the criminal psychology aspect, especially the criminalization of mental illness. That was actually my first book. It was called The Criminalization of the Mentally Ill. Back in 2007, I think, is when that one came out. And I really did a lot of work in that. And then I opened a private practice about 6 years ago, and I got out of regular community mental health and got more into, private practice where I specialize in anxiety and trauma and more of the things you see on the private practice end of things.
I like that because as a former police officer, I had crisis intervention training, and I think
I've been
dealing
through
with mental health individuals and people that have trauma or some sort of bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever. That's a very unique problem for us to deal with, especially as a therapist or a law enforcement officer. So that's kind of near and dear to my heart that you were kind of on the criminal side of things. Did you ever have a Dexter or anything crazy that you had to deal with? I mean, I know you probably can't share certain things, but
I wouldn't say I've worked with. I think the psychopaths are what people are more interested in, and I didn't really look into that. I think maybe that's what pulled me into it. Like the whole criminal minds type of thing. But what I found I worked a lot with serious and persistent mental illness, like the population you're talking about with people with schizophrenia and bipolar, like serious bipolar disorders and real bad depression or borderline personality disorders where, they might even be disabled by their illnesses, and found that a lot of my clients were in and out of the criminal justice system. And that's where I really got, felt kind of a calling to that. And I worked with mental health courts a lot. I was a mental health therapist consulting with one of the local prisons here, and have always been an advocate of that. I'm still an advocate of it, but yeah, like these last 6 years, I've been pretty much just working as an average generalist working in the community.
Cool. And as far as a pilot, because that's like a whole different side of things, what led you to get in that, and what kind of planes do you typically pilot?
So I'll tell you exactly how I got into it. It was 1985 or 6 or something like that, and I watched Top Gun for the first time, and that first 5 minutes of the movie when when they're flying off the aircraft carrier and they're playing the Top Gun anthem, it's like I was hooked at that very moment on airplanes, and just love the whole flying process. We traveled a lot as a kid. Yeah, well, adult too. I'm a travel author, but I always was just fascinated with airplanes. And when I got to college, I saw that they were doing intro flights. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've always wanted to do this, and I just got into it, and I haven't stopped. So I would love to lie and say I fly jets, and I fly, the 4-seat planes. We just sold we have a Piper Arrow, which is a 4-seat retractable gear airplane that I used to buzz around. I guess the farthest I went from northern Minnesota is Kansas City. So, those 1, 2, 3 hour flights is what I loved. But now I'll have to find a new airplane to fly. Yep.
That's pretty cool. I like that. We all got to have our vices or our hobbies, right? So
yeah, and I will say it gives you, that there's no better sense of freedom when you're up there flying. I mean, it's fun to fly friends around and things, but when you're stressed, and they say don't fly when you're too stressed, because you don't want to cloud your mind. But if you're flying around the rural areas and you got some stress in your life, I mean, there's no freer feeling from your stress than being up there flying.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So going into like who you are and how you are as a person and things that have happened, talk to us a little bit about the whole liver situation, what happened with that, how that became the liver transplant, and then we'll get into from that how things transpired through everything you were going through.
Sure. And actually my story really starts before my transplant by, maybe 7-ish years. So I actually, I'll say I had I had to fight for everything I got. I struggled in school as a kid and probably barely made it through high school. If it wasn't for sports, I probably would have dropped out of school. And then I went to college, followed my girlfriend to college, and I found a love of social sciences. And then I really started excelling in school for the first time. And I found that, I started, pulling A's and B's and I really found a love for school. So I ended up getting a PhD in counseling. And I guess life was good. I published my first book. I was rising to the top of the organization I was working in. I worked for 18 years in this community mental health center, doing these consulting jobs that I was talking about. I always had my foot in the criminal justice door, but I also worked in community mental health that whole time. At the same time, I got a job as soon as I got a master's degree. Even before I got my PhD, I got a job teaching at a college, and then right away I got a university job after that, teaching part-time on the side. And I did that for many years, up until just recently. And then I met the girl of my dreams in 2006, and life couldn't have been better. Couldn't have had a better wife. My son was, valedictorian, and he went to college and literally pulled straight A's all through college. And he's a social worker now. But, and actually he's the mayor of that's part of the reason I think I was so worried about the fires is there's this fire literally 4 miles from my house when I was out in Boston 2 weeks ago. And I was so worried because my son's the mayor of this town. He's one of the youngest mayors in Minnesota. He's 25. And he's also a firefighter. So I'm really I want to be there for him and protect him and,
right.
and my home and my community. And so anyway, but going back about 10 years now, I started developing these little dots on myself and thought it was just a dermatology type thing. And the doctors did too. And they prescribed cream and, nothing worked. And then they started getting really painful. And I finally got a doctor to give me an accurate diagnosis. And it was a disease called vasculitis. And if, Harold Ramis, he is one of the Ghostbusters. He had died of vasculitis. So,
Oh wow.
so there, I mean, it's on a spectrum. There's really serious kinds and there's really deadly kinds. And they didn't know actually if I tested positive for the deadly kind, but I also had some things that said maybe it's not this deadly kind. So, and I've always kind of carried this undertone of anxiety throughout my life. I've always hid it really well. I don't know that people really knew it, but I did, and that really started to impact me, that anxiety, and also through some stressors in my marriage. She had went through some hard times, so this great marriage turned, it 11 years of great marriage, and then a few months it threw it apart, and she left, and I started getting an upset stomach and started passing blood, and then I had this they thought I had ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and got treated for that, and so. And at that time too, I started self-medicating a little more with alcohol. I think I just I'm a therapist, and therapists are just human beings, and I'm in a hard drinking part of the country, and that's kind of what a lot of us do. And unfortunately, I fell right into that trap. And I also contracted some hepatitis A at some point in there. I think I got that in Acapulco on a vacation. And so all these factors, and then I also have some genetic issues for liver disease that I didn't know about. So about 3 years ago, I started getting another upset stomach, and actually all of my autoimmune diseases had gone away. So I was actually feeling okay. So like that colitis all that stuff went away. And I started getting a stomach ache and bloating, and the doctors weren't sure what it was. I went to the ER, and they just, take Prilosec and, that type of stuff. And it never went away. So they finally gave me an ultrasound, and I was sitting on this couch over here almost 3 years ago. And they actually a little over 3 years ago. And they said, we checked your ultrasound, and your liver is severely cirrhotic, and that just blew me out of the water, because I was a drinker, but it's like I wasn't super hardcore or anything like that, and I really didn't think but I had all these autoimmune issues at the same time that were affecting it, and I had an alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which makes it much more likely that you get liver disease, and those things combined. Yeah. So I had liver disease, and I started getting quite sick right after that. Ended up in the hospital with hepatic encephalopathy, where your brain swells, and my son found me unconscious. I had urinated my bed. I shouldn't say unconscious. I was sitting up in my bed, but just totally, lights on, nobody home. He was talking to me, and I couldn't answer him. I just,
wow.
Yeah. And yeah.
So let me ask you something that you said earlier that I think is very important to this. You said you hid your anxiety really well. Do you think that was something that learned from childhood? Was that because the whole stigma of being a man and we don't show our problems? I mean, here it is, you're a therapist, you deal with mental health issues, and you're dealing with your own demons, the issues with your marriage, your health issues, and, this anxiety. So what did that look like for you as far as your theories on why you hid it, and instead of just kind to, show people that you had this issue or problem?
Mm-hmm. I really think that I always carried this anxiety that I really didn't realize it was anxiety. I just kind of felt like, oh, this is life. And, and I always kind of barreled through it. And it wasn't until, my wife actually was wanting me. I mean, that's part of our divorce is, she wanted me to get help for my anxiety. And I said, I don't need, I thought it was fine. I didn't want to risk losing my pilot's license either, because that's another thing that affects pilots is, if you go in for mental health issues, you're supposed to report that to the FAA, and you can lose your license for a while, or forever, if you don't get better. So I chose to just try to, again, barrel through that. And after the divorce, I reached out for help. I pulled out all the stops because it's like, it just became undeniable after that point. And then the funny thing is it got like better so quick. And I went and saw a therapist, and, and we probably decided that I've always had maybe a generalized anxiety disorder, but I was so good at just kind of controlling it myself, but I really, didn't get to the root of it. And what I also found is, kind of getting into dark tourism is, I've always been sort of fascinated kind of with the taboo, and I've had a real big interest in history and stuff like that. And oh, you're frozen there for a sec. So anyway, so these trips I've taken, I've always kind of dabbled in dark tourism, and I didn't really realize what it was. And then I started, after my divorce, really, I started kind of finding myself in these places a lot. Every vacation I'd go on, I would end up being in these dark tourism spots. I would plan vacations around these dark tourism spots. I mean, that's why I went there. I didn't realize they were called dark tourism and things like that, but eventually I did, and that's a story in and of itself, is how I kind of came across that.
Yeah, so we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But what I like is, so I want people to know that, me as a coach, sometimes I need a coach. I've been to therapy. I've been on medication for mental health stuff. As I've always said, with everything that I do, I am an extension of the mental health industry. I'm not to overtake it. I'm not to replace it. So, if you need help, get help from, a medical professional or a mental health professional or a therapist or a psychologist or whatever works for you. But this just goes to show you that therapists, coaches, professionals, we're all human. We all go through our own drama, our own trauma, our own stuff, and we need help sometimes too. Whether you're, and it's a very crazy thing, I think, as far as trying to break the stigma of mental health, especially for veterans and first responders and even mental health professionals like yourself, because it's hard to identify what we're going through. It's hard to diagnose what we're going through. And unfortunately, we need that other person to tell us or show us, like, hey, you're not acting, normal. There might be something wrong. Let's go get this figured out and checked out. So, you had the issue with your liver. Your son finds you. You go to the hospital. What happens next?
So I was actually when you had this hepatic encephalopathy, you kind of get delusional. So I was twisting the words of nurses and things it gave me an experience of like maybe what some of my psychotic clients have been through, which was actually really eye opening to actually have that experience. My son drives also as an ambulance person. So I thought he brought me to the hospital, and I'm like, well, where's my son? Well, your son's not here. And I took that as he didn't exist at all. And I was like struggling with thoughts like, my son doesn't exist at all. How crazy am I? And then as my brain went back to normal, everything was fine that way. Took a little while, but my liver was really not well, and they sent me for a transplant evaluation at that time. And I actually was getting better, and they didn't put me on the transplant list. They actually predicted that, my liver might recover to the point where I would never need a transplant. And I did really well. I mean, as soon as I heard anything about liver disease, actually, even before that, I had stopped drinking. So, I mean, that wasn't a factor. And I started living a pretty healthy lifestyle, exercising and eating healthy, and things were pretty good for a couple of years. I did a lot of traveling. I think that was kind of eye opening, and that's where I went to a lot of these dark tourism spots during those couple of years where I had this liver disease, and it kind of just gave me a different maybe outlook on life, and I sought out places more. I didn't really, I guess, didn't know how long I would live. I mean, I didn't, I still was having liver issues. And so I went to, Jerusalem. I went to Valley of the Kings in Egypt and in the pyramids and Auschwitz, several places, and actually I was in Oslo. I went to Oslo in part to find my great grandparents. To kind of get back to my roots. That's where where part of my family's from. So I was able to find my great grandparents' grave, a church that they helped start there also, and that was really cool. But at that same time, I was getting really sick. I was getting,
Oh, wow.
and I wasn't sure, and it was actually like literally in those few days that I was in Oslo, I started getting really sick. It wasn't even before that. I was in Berlin doing dark tourism stuff in Berlin, and I did it just fine. But then I got to Oslo and just started not feeling well. And actually at that time, I read an article in National Geographic about dark tourism, and it talked about the different motivations for dark tourism, the different sites of dark tourism. And it was interviewing this guy by the name of Dr. Philip Stone. And he was a director of the Institute of Dark Tourism Research. And I'm like, I'm a dark tourist. It just kind of occurred to me. It's like, I have done almost all the things they're talking about in this article. I go there, he talked about, some people go there for the sensationalism, but most people go there because of history and because they like to, pay the respects to people's suffering and acknowledge that and carry their voices forward. And that's kind of why I went to those places. And then as soon as I got home, I took a blood test and my liver was off the charts bad. And within a month I was on the transplant list. And a month after that, I had my first call to go get a liver. I mean, and what a rush that was. You get called to the Twin Cities at the University of Minnesota is where I had my transplant. Get called there. And then I'm there for a couple of days waiting for this person to pass away, which is like, a experience in and of itself. Just, it's such a weird feeling. You're waiting for somebody to pass away. It's such a, I can't even put words on it, and then their family, my doctor wanted to do one more test because the person was still alive and they wanted to do one more test on the liver, and the family actually said no. And that made my doctor nervous. So he turned the liver down. And at that time I was starting to get sick. I'm turning yellow. My eyes are really yellow. I got fluid all over my body, starting to swell up, and my lungs, the sac around my lungs were starting to fill full of fluid. And I remember laying in that bed, barely able to breathe. And my doctor calling me at around midnight saying, I just turned on that liver. It's like, and that's what I thought back to. Actually, I thought back to Normandy. They had a delay in Normandy before they hit the beaches on D-Day. And they were delayed by a day due to weather. And I'm thinking, I thought back to them. It's like, because I was feeling just so alone. And I, when you go to enough of these places, you really start thinking in terms of history, not in the terms of where you go to places and you learn the facts. I mean, you learn some facts, but most stuff you forget. I mean, like, can you remember the stuff you learned in history class? Can you learn? I mean,
right.
You remember some of it, the main story, but you don't remember necessarily all the facts. But in dark tourism, I think when you go in with a lot of reverence and a lot of empathy in these places, you remember things on an emotional level. And when you learn things on an emotional level, it registers in the hippocampus. It kind of etches in there, for lack of neurology explanation, but sort of etches in your hippocampus. And it's always there. And so when you're going through your own dark times, it just kind of comes back to sort of thank you for, going to Normandy or going to Auschwitz or going to, the Paris catacombs and it comes back to you and it kind of speaks to you. And it made me feel, when I thought back to the people at Normandy, that I just didn't feel so alone in my suffering. And even though obviously their trauma was much different than my trauma, it was still, it's like, okay, it's this delay. It's like, you can make these connections.
So, So I want to get back to the liver a little bit later, but for those that don't know, explain what is dark tourism. And you talked a little bit about the emotion. So I want to know, you're in these places with your liver causing issues. So when you're in these, like, I guess, dark places or dark tourism spots, how did that make you feel as far as your connection with the terrible things that happened there, and how that made you feel overall? And then what is the difference now? Because I assume you still do some dark tourism with your emotions and thought problems now that essentially I'm assuming you're a pretty healthy guy.
Right. Yeah. Very healthy, actually. So, and I want to say this to your before I answer this question, because I'll forget if I don't say this right now, is when they ask you to be a donor, be a donor. You could save, I don't know how many lives one donation makes, but I mean you can save multiple lives by donating your organs. And usually they get thrown in the trash or whatever happens with them anyway. So, like, why wouldn't you donate them?
Wow.
And yeah, and I thank God for my donor. I mean, I think about that person every day. I don't know who the person is. I wrote a letter to the family and never heard back, but thank God for that person. I think about him every day. So kind of going back to your question, now I forgot your question. Dark tourism is traveling to places that are associated with death, trauma, disaster, suffering, things like that, or even the macabre. And it is on a wide spectrum. So there was a study in the United States, and about 83% of all Americans, and it was a fairly big study. So about 83% of all Americans have gone to dark tourism spots. So it could be cemeteries, it could be battlefields, former prisons like Alcatraz or the Eastern State Penitentiary. There's the 9/11 memorial,
Right.
the Whitney plantation down by New Orleans is, I hate, picking favorites and that kind of thing, because everybody's suffering is valid and things, but I think one of the ones that had resonated the hardest with me in the United States was the Whitney plantation, which tells the story of a plantation from the slave point of view. It's and it's the main house is just a walkthrough area, and if somebody's flying a Confederate flag after going through that, I don't know, they got issues. Yeah.
So I'd never, until I met you, I never heard of this. So that's pretty interesting. And even when I was stationed in Japan for 3 years, I didn't have the opportunity to go see Hiroshima. Or I used to grow up in California. I didn't get to see Alcatraz. So these are some things that I'll probably try to venture and see, just to see what kind of emotion it elicits being in these areas. So with the feeling sick or having your health issues and being in these spots, was there any kind of peace or gratitude or, something mindset shift where maybe you're yeah, I'm suffering, but my life isn't nearly as bad as what happened to these people or this incident?
You would think that that's sort of the reflection you get out of these things. And maybe you do a little bit. For example, you go to Auschwitz, and that was, I went to the Auschwitz a few months before my transplant, and you go through there, you see, the shoes and that they collected, and they actually had a large, I don't want to call it a showcase, but a case of women's ponytails and hair that they had shaved off, and wedding rings, and and then you go through all the buildings where all these terrible things happen. You see the infamous shooting wall, and then you go to this gas chamber, and you walk down into this gas chamber that thousands of men, women, children had walked down, and it's the only one still standing there. The other ones were blowing up. But you go down there, and I remember I let my tour group go to the next room because it almost felt like they were hurrying us through that room. And it's gosh, the historical significance of this room is the emotional significance of this room. It's like sadness seeped through every crack. I'm getting a little emotional even talking about it, where, you can almost envision people collapsing one by one in that room. And it's, you don't walk out that other side of that building the same person. it changes your life. So I never compared I mean, maybe I did, but it wasn't a big thought where I compared my suffering to those in Auschwitz. But when you go through any of these places, it's almost like a mirror emerges and you see little pieces of yourself in every one of these things, and I think when you go in with like complete reverence and a lot of empathy, for the suffering of that, the things that they had went through, again, then you start kind of imagining how you might have fared in those areas. And by having those experiences, that strength comes back to you again when you're in your darkest hour. And you know, when I had anxiety, when I had this vasculitis, that was part of the issue. Whereas I had such anxiety, I was up in the middle of the night Googling research. I mean, I was literally looking at study after study at 3 a.m. I'd get a blood test in, and I had many blood tests because they were trying to really figure out what was going on. So I've had hundreds of blood tests during that time. And I would search each one. What does this mean? Is it good? Is it bad? What is it correlated to? I was driving myself absolutely bonkers.
Right.
I didn't want to die. I was thinking like, oh, what's my son going to do? I mean, the steroids got me to a point where like I was having some pretty dark thoughts, and just because of the way I was feeling, it was awful, and yeah, in the middle of that, my wife left, and my dad almost died of sepsis. I mean, it was like such a traumatic time. But then I go through this transplant, and 2 weeks after I had that failed, where they backed out, 2 weeks later, I got called again. And I got called 5 minutes after I was told my grandma wasn't going to make it through the night. And she was in hospice and things, so it was expected. But so I get down to the University of Minnesota, pretty emotional, but it's like I had absolutely no fear. I just was, it's like I didn't even. They were going to give me some benzodiazepines to help with anxiety through it. And it's like I don't need it. I don't feel any anxiety. I want to be awake for all of this. I want to experience it. This is kind of exciting,
Oh, wow.
and and it was humbling at the same time, with just medical technology. I mean, if this had happened 50 years ago, I probably would be dead. Even 20 years ago, it would have been a lot more difficult. And yeah, I remember getting wheeled down there, and it was like, I almost felt like, again, I think in terms of history, almost felt like a, and I apologize for this comparison, but it was my story, and I felt like a soldier kind of getting wheeled into battle, and am I going to make it? Am I not? And I just, but I didn't feel anxiety. I just felt like I'm ready for this. And without my experiences in dark tourism, I guarantee you I would never have been to that point, especially based on my history.
I don't see anything wrong with your comparison. I mean, I think everybody in their lifetime at some point deals with their own battles, right? They have to deal with their own fight, their own war, the war in their mind, the war in their soul, whatever's going on in life. We all fight battles, right? Just because I did it professionally doesn't mean that my plight is any worse than yours. And I actually I like that analogy. Like, so was it the dark tour? Like, so what I just kind of trying to figure out, I guess, you're kind of going through this craziness of trying to, WebMD everything and find out, how to get through this, which is causing you more pain and anxiety.
Right.
Was it the dark tourism, or was there a mindset shift? What changed between that and then when you were actually going down that hallway that put you at peace? Like, was it spirituality? Was it, what was that shift that happened?
I wish I could tell you there was a cathartic moment, or I would put dark tourism into something similar to, I was just at a conference and Bessel van der Kolk was there. And, he does the Body Keeps the Score. He wrote that book, and probably the most famous trauma person alive right now. And he had talked about psychedelics being like the number one treatment that he has hope for mental health. And I would put dark tourism in the same realm as that, or with the astronauts have that, I can't remember what it's called. They have overview effect. So when they go up to space, they look back at Earth and see how, how beautiful and but small Earth is, and how large the universe is, and how they're just this small, tiny person in the world. And then there's this concept called memento mori, where it started off back in ancient Rome.
Yeah,
And they would have, yep.
I think was it Alexander the Great, or was it I forget who said that. That's one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah.
Memento mori, remember you have to die. It's such a powerful statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's cool, because I wanted to get into, now that you are, healthier, how has stoicism, exercise and fitness, what has happened in your life now to help you build daily strength and be more resilient as a human being?
Yeah, I love this, because I used to fancy myself as stoic, but it was the John Wayne kind of stoic. It was the, nothing bothers me, I'm fine, and I get pissed off, but but don't let them see my vulnerable side, and I thought that was stoic. I just tried to stuff it. And that's not stoic. That's being stupid, and that's the people that are going through, that might be the police officer or the firefighter or the soldier or the therapist or the nurse or whatever, that, that, oh, nothing bothers me. And then, they're self-medicating, or they're not reaching out to the right places. So through dark tourism and the memento mori, the flip side of memento mori is remember to live. And that's what dark tourism does. It puts it into stark contrast. And it shows you that's like, yeah, okay, you're going to die. Live your life. And, and when you have that different perspective, that shift, you can truly become a real stoic, and you don't sweat the things you don't have control over. I didn't have control over whether I'd live or die in the operating room.
Right.
So I didn't worry about it. I did the same thing with the fire when I was in Boston. It's like, I didn't have control. I could feel it in my body. My body was anxious, and I literally had to talk to my body saying, okay, stomach, you can calm down. Everything's going to be fine. Your son's going to be okay. Your town's going to be okay. And then my stomach would start feeling better. But on a cognitive level, I was fine. So yeah, I think that flip side of the memento mori allows you to be a true stoic. And so you change the things you can, and it's kind of like the serenity prayer, change the things you can and accept what you can't.
Definitely.
And yeah.
So before I ask you my final question, give us a brief breakdown of your book, Beyond the Darkness, your transformative journeys through dark tourism, and where that is currently available, if anybody would like to pick that up.
Yeah. It's in every online bookstore for the most part. And then it's in select bookstores, physical bookstores. So Beyond the Darkness, though, that came out May 1st, and it's had some really great critical reviews. Kirkus and the San Francisco Book Review and a few others have just really loved the book. And what it is it's my travels going to places like Hiroshima and the catacombs, and all, a lot of them are in the United States and a lot of them are worldwide, so it kind of gets the full gamut. And I talk about, again, there's a big spectrum to dark tourism. So there's, sites that are more, it's okay if you're more into sensationalism, if you go on a ghost tour or they have the London Dungeon and things like that, where it's more edutainment, where it's more entertainment based, but it's also, you get an education with your will doing it. And, and then it moves into more serious, like museums and then cemeteries, but then it hits, the real serious, like the real, profound places like Hiroshima and Auschwitz and places of genocide and things like that. And, but also, as I'm talking about each of these places, I'm giving my reflections on them. So it's a story of my travels, and it's also a story of, the overall reach of my, my main story that I talked to you today about, was, going
cool.
through these struggles with myself, and then how dark tourism has helped me over time. And so I tell my story too, mixed within that. So it's a memoir as well as kind of a travelogue of going through all these different sites around the world.
Awesome. And where can they connect with you? We're going to put all this obviously in the show notes and the description, but where's the best places to find you at?
Yeah, so really my only active social media is on Facebook, Chad Scott Author, and then my website is drchadscott.com.
Sounds good. And once again, we'll put those in the show notes. So the last question that I always ask all my guests is, what is your definition of turning pain into progress?
Well, there's always hope. You might not be able to see it. You have to find it, and you'll get through it. Pain is temporary, and suffering is temporary, and you'll get through it. And you just have to believe, and don't give up your hope.
I like that. I like the term hope. And I was talking to somebody on another podcast, and we were saying that sometimes people use the word hope as a negative word, right? And we don't understand that, because hope is a beautiful thing. Hope is a wonderful thing. But when someone says, "Oh, I hope my day goes well," and a lot of people will be like, "What do you mean you hope your day goes well?" So I think we have to switch that back around to where if I say, "I hope my day goes well," that gives me the power and the belief with my mindset that I'm going to have a good day. So with that being said, Dr. Chad, I appreciate you being here on the Battle Harder podcast. Guys, check out his book. If you want to learn more about dark tourism, which is something that I never even knew about, and it sounds like it can have a wonderful purpose, if not more than just educating you on some of things that have happened in our culture, society. And remember, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with, you have to have hope. You have to have, as I always say in every episode, limitless beliefs, not limiting beliefs. Right. Because whatever we believe in, whatever we feel like, whatever we think, that projects into our subconscious, and that becomes our reality. So you have to find different ways to turn your negativity into positivity. And Dr. Chad, who lost essentially his marriage, his parents, and went through this hellacious journey of having liver issues and health issues, completely turned his life around by using dark tourism to help him. And everything that he went through, as you can see, it made him stronger. It allowed him to write a book. He's still helping people to this day. He's healthier than ever, and he's living a purposeful life. And at the end of the day, that's all I want for you, is to be the best version of yourself. So with that being said, this has been another episode of the Battle Harder podcast. Dr. Chad, once again, thank you for being here. And
thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome, and always turn your pain into progress.
Absolutely.
You've just heard another battle-tested conversation. Now it's time to take action. If this episode lit a fire in you, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, or YouTube, so you never miss a moment that could change your life. Want to go deeper? Connect with Coach Rob at BattleFittedBrand.com for coaching, gear, and tools to help you turn your pain into progress. Remember, life will test you, but you're built to battle harder. Until next time, stay locked in, stay ready, and keep showing up.